Man, it has been too long since I've heard that intro. Welcome to King Pilled, folks. This is the second stream of the day. I've promised you guys we were going to get to this, and the rest of my week isn't looking the afternoon and evening time isn't looking very free for the rest of the week. So we're going to squeeze this one in here this evening. This is a King Pilled episode. You might have been used to seeing me on the Astrolabe recently. We'll have the Astrolabe tomorrow. I've already got a whole bunch of great bookmarks lined up for you. In fact, I'm going to tease a couple of them, or at least one of them here in just a second. But this episode will appear on the podcatchers, so if you can't stick around for the whole thing, it will show up as a podcast later on. We're going to read a piece that was written by JD Vance. He is now the presumptive next vice president and is going to have a big influence, I would imagine, and he's a vector for significant influence. So I think it's useful to understand where he's coming from a spiritual perspective. What's his background? He converted to Catholicism in 2019. A lot of people are pretty cynical about that. They see that as not very believable. And so I'm going to give you guys some information. This is a piece I've never seen anybody else talk about. I don't even know where I found it. Never seen anybody talk about it in the past. And I've read up on JD Vance quite a bit. Never encountered this. It's a very interesting look. He's definitely a philosopher, and you're going to get that philosopher side of him in this stream. So right now, we're just waiting on Cooper to show up. Before he does, let me share with you guys, tease you with one of the stories that we're going to discuss tomorrow on the Astrolabe, which is the morning live stream that I do every Monday through Friday, every morning about 10:30 or so Central Time. Hop on and go through whatever stories I found on Twitter or YouTube or what have you and read through them and discuss. This one here we'll read through tomorrow, but the tweet about it says, we uncovered a JD Vance speech that has never been reported. He says the devil is real, says Alex Jones is more reliable than Rachel Maddow. It was a speech given to a secret Leonard Leo networking group. This is published by ProPublica, and we'll go through that tomorrow. There's some interesting stuff in there. The other thing I wanted to share with you guys here before we get started is this tweet from Father John Whiteford. It was earlier this morning. St. Paisios on whether or not we should vote and how we should vote. And I do believe that this is relevant to the current circumstances. Captain Fashionista is here. How's it going, buddy?
Yo. Can everybody hear me? I'm looking kind of quiet on my side, so.
You sound good to me. So we'll find out what the people think. Shout out to Pete Quinones in the chat. He says, we are so back. Colin says, use a different background color for King Pill. Do you know I did that before? I changed it to blue, and it just made me look really pale and washed out and just didn't have quite the punch that the red did. So maybe I just need to get some new lights and come up with a different color. But this is what Elder Paisios, or back then when this was written, Elder, now St. Paisios, this is what he had to say. He said, when some people went to visit the elder just before an election, they asked who they should vote for. And he replied, vote for the one you believe it is best, the one who loves God and our country. They always gave the same reply. They are all the same, Father. Then he said, well, look here. All olive trees are the same. All of them are affected by the same disease called Dakos. However, some are affected 100% by it, others 80%, and others 50%. Since we are in need of olive trees, we have to look for the ones that are affected the least. When we go to vote, we should always bear in mind two things. A, how much the candidate loves God and is thus a conscious member of the church. And B, how much he loves his country and looks solely after its interests and not his own. If someone uses another criterion to vote, he is acting out of self-interest and is not behaving like a true Christian. Later on, divine justice will allow him to pay for his mistake. So this is wisdom from a saint about how to approach the voting and the involvement in the political process in general, I would say, which is interesting. As soon as I saw that there was advice from St. Paisios on how to vote, I wanted to see exactly what it was, because I haven't been Orthodox that long, and the Orthodox perspective on the role of the state and the relationship of the church to the state is very different than most Protestant cultures that I grew up around. So this is very interesting to see. Okay, so join us tomorrow morning for the Astrolabe. For now, though, let us get to this. Just before I hopped on here, Cooper. I got a notification. Someone commented on the YouTube stream from this morning, and he said, "This is fantastic. Your content has improved massively over the past few months." And I wasn't quite sure how to take that. Is that a compliment? Is that an insult? I don't know. It's like the definition of a backhanded compliment. I like it.
Yeah.
Okay, so this here was posted in The Lamp magazine. It was posted April 1st, 2020. So try to think back to where you were April 1st. April 1st of 2020. Just over 4 years ago now. COVID was just becoming a thing. So that's basically where he was at his point in life when he wrote this. And he was baptized. I think it'll talk about it later in here, but he was I don't think he was baptized, but he was received into the church in I want to say August or September.
He said he was baptized.
Was he? Maybe he was.
Yeah.
Okay. So he says, I often wonder what my grandmother, Mama as I called her, would have thought about her grandson becoming Catholic. We used to argue about religion constantly. She was a woman of deep but completely deinstitutionalized faith. She loved Billy Graham and Donald Eisen, a preacher from her home in southeastern Kentucky, but she loathed, quote, organized religion. She often wondered aloud how the simple message of sin, redemption, and grace had given way to the televangelists on an early 1990s Ohio TV screen. These people are all crooks and perverts, she told me. All they want is money. But she watched them anyway, and they were the closest she usually came to regular church service, at least in Ohio. Unless she was back home in Kentucky, she rarely attended church. And if she did, it was usually to satisfy my early adolescent quest for some attachment to Christianity besides the 700 Club. Like many poor people, Mama rarely voted, seeing electoral politics as fundamentally corrupt. She liked FDR, Harry S. Truman, and that was about it. Unsurprisingly, a woman whose only political heroes had been dead for decades didn't like politics as a matter of course and cared even less for the political drift of modern Protestantism. My first real exposure to an institutional church would come later through my father's large Pentecostal congregation in southwestern Ohio. Your people, Cooper.
Yeah, indeed.
But I knew a few things about Catholicism well before then. I knew that Catholics worshipped Mary. I knew they rejected the legitimacy of Scripture. And I knew that the Antichrist, or at least the Antichrist's spiritual advisor, would be a Catholic. Or at the time I would have said is a Catholic, as I felt pretty confident that the Antichrist walked among us. Mama seemed not to care much about Catholics. Her younger daughter had married one, and she thought him a good man. She felt their way of worshiping was rather formal and peculiar, but what mattered to her was Jesus. Revelation 18 may have been about Catholics, and it may have been about something else. But the Catholics she knew cared about Jesus, and that was all right with her. Still, Mama looms so large in my mind. She still, more than a decade after her death, is the person to whom I most feel indebted. Without her, I wouldn't be here. And the uncomfortable fact is that the Christ of the Catholic Church always seemed a little different from the Jesus I'd grown up with. A little too stodgy, too formal. Solomon's famous portrait of Christ hung upstairs near my bedroom, and that's how I encountered him. Personal and kind, but a little forlorn. The Christ of Catholicism floated high above you as a grown man or a baby, wreathed in beams of light and crowned like a king. There is no way to avoid the discomfort a woman like Mama felt with that kind of a Christ. The Catholic Jesus was a majestic deity, and we had little interest in majestic deities because we weren't a majestic people. This was the most significant hang-up I encountered after I began to think about becoming Catholic. I could think myself out of most standard objections. Catholics didn't, it turned out, worship Mary. Their acceptance of both scriptural and traditional authority slowly appeared to me as wisdom, as I watched too many of my friends struggle with what a given passage of scripture could possibly mean. I even began to acquire a sense that Catholicism possessed a historical continuity with the church fathers, indeed with Christ himself, that the unchurched religion of my upbringing couldn't match. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that if I converted, I would no longer be my grandmother's grandson. So for many years, I occupied the uncomfortable territory between curiosity about Catholicism and mistrust. I got there in a pretty conventional way. I joined the Marines after high school like so many of my peers. Indeed, the only other 2003 high school graduate on my block also enlisted in the Marines. I left for Iraq in 2005, a young idealist committed to spreading democracy and liberalism to the backward nations of the world. I returned in 2006, skeptical of the war and the ideology that underpinned it. Many such cases. Mama was dead, and without a church or anything to anchor me to the faith of my youth, I've slid from devout to nominal and then to something very much less. By the time I left the Marines in 2007 and began college at The Ohio State University, I read Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris and called myself an atheist. I won't belabor... Yeah, right. He's run the gamut.
Yeah, for real. Christopher Hitchens, at least he was like fun to listen to. He's very charming, really punchy.
Right, he had a personality.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I kind of like Hitch.
Mm-hmm. I remember seeing Sam Harris as
Sam Harris, but I can't listen to him.
I can't even look at him. Like it's instant rage. But I remember seeing him as just kind of sort of like, oh yeah, that guy kind of, he's like an atheist guy or whatever, but he's kind of says some interesting things about consciousness or whatever. It's wild to think about now. He is the definition of the most punchable person I can imagine.
Yeah, that voice, man.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Trying to hypnotize you.
Yeah, really. Get out of my brain.
Yeah. Josiah, with Machiavellian plants this good, who needs an hour guy? We're getting ahead of things. We'll keep reading.
Yeah.
Okay, where was I? Called myself an atheist. I won't belabor the story of how I got there because it is both conventional and boring. A lot of it had to do with a feeling of irrelevance. Increasingly, the religious leaders I turned to tended to argue that if you prayed hard enough and believed hard enough, God would reward your faith with earthly riches. But I knew many people who believed and prayed a lot without any riches to show for it. But there are two insights worth reflecting from that phase in my life, as they both presaged an intellectual awakening not long ago that ultimately led me back to Christ. The first is that for an upwardly mobile poor kid from a rough family, atheism leads to an undeniable familial and cultural rupture. To be an atheist is to be no longer of the community that made you who you were. For so long, I hid my unbelief from my family, not because any of them would have cared very much. Very few of my family members attended church, but everyone believed in something rather than nothing. There were ways of compensating for this, and one of those, at least for me, was a brief flirtation with libertarianism. Many such cases. To lose my faith was to lose my cultural conservatism, and in a world that was growing increasingly aligned with the Republican Party, my ideological response took the form of overcompensation. Having lost my cultural conservatism, I would become even more economically conservative. The irony, of course, is that it was the economic program of the Republican Party that least interested my family. None of them cared how much the Bush administration slashed tax rates for billionaires. The GOP became a kind of totem. I attached myself to it ever more strongly because it gave me some common ground with my family. And the most respectable way to do so among my new college friends was through a dogged commitment to neoliberal economic orthodoxy. Tax breaks and Social Security cuts were socially acceptable ways to be conservative among the American elite. The second insight is that my abandonment of religion was more cultural than intellectual. There were ways in which I found my religion difficult to square with science as it came to me. I've never been a classical Darwinist, for instance, for reasons David Galertner has outlined in his excellent new book. But evolutionary theory in some form struck me as plausible.
That's one of the guys who Ted Kaczynski sent a bomb to.
David Galertner?
Oh yeah, he's I think he's at U of M. He's a computer science professor. Yeah, he's missing it. He's got like a robo hand because it got blown off by one of the bombs.
Oh shit! Interesting.
He's associated with the Discovery Institute, if you're familiar with them.
Oh yeah.
Like David Berlinski and Stephen Meyer.
Oh, okay. Oh, interesting. He is in addition known for his views against women in the workforce and his rejection of the scientific consensus regarding anthropogenic climate change and evolution. Huh. Known for his contributions to parallel computation in the 1980s and for books on topics such as computed worlds. He's also known for his belief, expressed in his book America Light, How Imperial Academia Dismantled Our Culture and Ushered in the Obamacrats, that liberal academia has a destructive influence on American society. How freaking fascinating. Ah, Orthodox Jew. Yeah, I should have known. You could tell.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see here. Where was I? Oh, I've never been a classical Darwinist, for instance, for reasons David Galertner has outlined in his excellent new book. But evolutionary theory in some form struck me as plausible, and though I consumed Tornado in a Junkyard and every other work of young earth creationism, I eventually got to the point where I couldn't square my understanding of biology with what my church told me I had to believe. I was never so committed to young earth creationism that I felt I had to choose between biology and Genesis. But the tension between a scientific account of our origin and the biblical account I'd absorbed made it easier to discard my faith. So one thing that's really stands out to me through this whole thing, the way he writes, the way he approaches these things, the way he thinks about them, the specific directions that he's gone in his history and how he's thought back and come to understand them. He's very clearly like a philosophy-minded person. He's a philosopher. I said this on the show this morning. He's not a Marshall type of guy. He's very much of the philosopher class. And the truth is that I discarded it for the simplest of reasons, the madness of crowds. Much of my new atheism came down to a desire for social acceptance among American elites. I spent so much of my time around a different type of people with a different set of priorities that I couldn't help but absorb some of their preferences. I became interested in secularism just as my attention turned to my separation from the Marines and my impending transition to college. I knew how the educated tended to feel about religion. At best, provincial and stupid. At worst, evil. Echoing Hitchens, I began to think and then eventually to say things like, the Christian cosmos is more like North Korea than America, and I know where I'd like to live. I was fitting into my new caste, in deed and emotion. I'm embarrassed to admit this, but the truth often reflects poorly on its subject. And if I could say something in my defense, it wasn't exactly conscious. I didn't think to myself, I'm not going to be a Christian because Christians are rubes and I want to plant myself firmly in the meritocratic masterclass. Socialization operates in more subtle but more powerful ways. My son is 2, and he has in the last 6 months, just as his social intelligence has skyrocketed, transitioned from ripping our German Shepherd's fur out to hugging and kissing him gleefully. Part of that comes from the joy of giving and receiving affections from man's best friend. But part of it comes from the fact that my wife and I grimace and complain when he tortures the dog, but coo and laugh when he loves on it. He responds to us much as I responded to the educated caste to which I slowly gained exposure. In college, very few of my friends and even fewer of my professors had any sort of religious faith. Secularism may not have been a prerequisite to join the elites, but it sure made things easier. I just know that if I was just going to say, there he is. I was going to say if Jason's in here, he's going to be spazzing out because this is memetics that he's describing here. Of course, if you had told me this when I was 24, I would have protested vigorously. I would have quoted not just Hitchens, but Russell and Ayer. I would have told you all the ways in which C.S. Lewis was a moron whose arguments could only hold water against third-rate intellects. I'd watch Ravi Zacharias just to note the problems in his arguments, lest a better-read Christian deploy those arguments against me. He's making some deep cuts here. I don't know very many people who have read Ravi Zacharias and Carl Schmitt. Mm-hmm. I prided myself on an ability to overwhelm the opposition with my logic. There was an arrogance at the heart of my worldview, emotionally and intellectually. But I comforted myself with an appeal to a philosopher whose atheism cum libertarianism told me everything I wanted to hear. Ayn Rand. Yeah. Great smart men were only arrogant if they were wrong, and I was anything but that. But there were seeds of doubt, one planted in the mind and the other in the heart. The former I encountered during a mid-level philosophy course at Ohio State. I had read a famous written debate between Antony Flew, R.M. Hare, and Basil Mitchell. Flew, an atheist, though he later recanted, argues that theological utterances, like God loves man, are fundamentally unfalsifiable and thus meaningless. Because believers won't let a fact count against their faith, their views aren't really claims about the world. This certainly spoke to my experience of what believers say when faced with apparent difficulties. Confronted with unspeakable tragedy, the Lord works in mysterious ways. In the face of loneliness and desperation, God still loves you. If real, obvious challenges to these sentiments were processed and then ignored by the faithful, then their faith must be pretty hollow. If real, obvious challenges to these sentiments were processed and then ignored by the faithful, then their faith must be pretty hollow. Our class spent the most time discussing Flew's opening volley and the response by Hare, which essentially concedes Flew's point but argues that religious feelings are meaningful and potentially true nonetheless. Basil Mitchell's response received less attention in class, but his words remain among the most powerful I've ever read. I've thought about them constantly since. He begins with a parable about a wartime soldier in occupied territory who meets a stranger. The soldier is so taken with the stranger that he believes he is the leader of the resistance. This is quoting. Sometimes the stranger is seen helping members of the resistance, and the partisan is grateful and says to his friends, he is on our side. Sometimes he is seen in the uniform of the police handing over patriots to the occupying power. On these occasions, his friends murmur against him, but the partisan still says, he is on our side. He still believes that, in spite of appearances, the stranger did not deceive him. Sometimes he asks the stranger for help and receives it. He is then thankful. Sometimes he asks and does not receive it. Then he says the stranger knows best. Sometimes his friends, in exasperation, say, well, what would he have to do for you to admit that you were wrong and that he is not on our side? But the partisan refuses to answer. He will not consent to put the stranger to the test. And sometimes his friends complain, well, if that's what you mean by his being on our side, the sooner he goes over to the other side, the better. The partisan of the parable does not allow anything to count decisively against the proposition the stranger is on our side. This is because he has committed himself to trust the stranger. But he, of course, recognizes that the stranger's ambiguous behavior does count against what he believes about him. It is precisely this situation which constitutes the trial of his faith. End quote. At the time, I tried my best to dismiss Mitchell's response. Flew had described the faith I discarded perfectly, but Mitchell articulated a faith that I had never encountered personally. Doubt was unacceptable. I had thought that the proper response to a trial of faith was to suppress it and pretend it never happened. But here was Mitchell conceding that the brokenness of the world and our individual tribulations did, in fact, count against the existence of God, but not definitively. I would eventually conclude that Mitchell had won the philosophical debate years before I realized how much his humility in the face of doubt affected my own faith. As I advanced through our educational hierarchy, moving on from Ohio State to Yale Law School, I began to worry that my assimilation into elite culture came at a high cost. My sister once told me that the song that made her think of me was Simple Man by Lynyrd Skynyrd. Though I had fallen in love, I found that the emotional demons of my childhood made it hard to be the type of partner I'd always wanted to be. My Randian arrogance about my own ability melted away when confronted with the realization that an obsession with achievement would fail to produce the achievement that mattered most to me for so much of my life: a happy, thriving family. I had immersed myself in the logic of the meritocracy and found it deeply unsatisfying. And I began to wonder, were all these worldly markers of success actually making me a better person? I traded virtue for achievement and found the latter wanting. But the woman I wanted to marry cared little whether I obtained a Supreme Court clerkship. She just wanted me to be a good person. It's possible, of course, to overstate our own inadequacies. I never cheated on my would-be spouse. I never became violent with her. But there was a voice in my head that demanded better of me, that I put her interests above my own, that I master my temper for her sake as much as for mine. And I began to realize that this voice, wherever it came from, was not the same one that compelled me to climb as high as I could up our ladder of meritocracy. It came from somewhere more ancient and more grounded. It required reflection about where I came from rather than cultural divorce from it. As I considered these twin desires for success and character, and how they conflicted, and didn't, I came across a meditation from St. Augustine on Genesis. I had been a fan of Augustine since a political theorist in college assigned City of God. But his thoughts on Genesis spoke to me and are worth reproducing at length. Quoting, "In matters that are obscure and far beyond our vision, even in such as we may find treated in Holy Scripture, different interpretations are sometimes possible without prejudice to the faith we have received. In such a case, we should not rush in headlong and so firmly take our stand on one side that, if further progress in the search of truth justly undermines this position, we too fall with it. That would be to battle not for the teaching of Holy Scripture, but for our own, wishing its teaching to conform to ours, whereas we ought to wish ours to conform to that of sacred Scripture. Let us suppose that in explaining the words, 'And God said, let there be light, and light was made,' Genesis 1:3, one man thinks that it was material light that was made, and another that it was spiritual. As to the actual existence of spiritual light in a spiritual creature, our faith leaves no doubt. As to the existence of material light, celestial or supercelestial, even existing before the heavens, a light which could have been followed by night, there will be nothing in such a supposition contrary to the faith until unerring truth gives the lie to it. And if that should happen, this teaching was never in Holy Scripture, but was an opinion proposed by man in his ignorance. Usually, even a non-Christian knows something about the earth, the heavens, and the other elements of the world, about the motion and orbit of the stars and even their size and relative positions, about the predictable eclipses of the sun and moon, the cycles of the years and the seasons, about the kinds of animals, shrubs, stones, and so forth. And this knowledge he holds to as being certain from reason and experience. Now, it is a disgraceful and dangerous thing for an infidel to hear a Christian, presumably giving the meaning of Holy Scripture, talking nonsense on these topics, and we should take all means to prevent such an embarrassing situation in which people show up vast ignorance in a Christian and laugh it to scorn. The shame is not so much that an ignorant individual is derided, but that people outside the household of faith think our sacred writers held such opinions, and to the great loss of those for whose salvation we toil, the writers of our Scripture are criticized and rejected as unlearned men. If they find a Christian mistaken in a field which they themselves know well, and hear him maintaining his foolish opinions about our books, how are they going to believe those books in matters concerning the resurrection of the dead, the hope of eternal life, and the kingdom of heaven, when they think their pages are full of falsehoods on facts which they themselves have learnt from experience in the light of reason?" Close quote. I couldn't stop thinking about how I would have reacted to this passage when I was a kid. If someone had made the very same argument to me when I was 17, I would have called him a heretic. This was an accommodation to science, the kind that someone like Bill Maher rightly mocked contemporary moderate Christians for indulging. Yet here was a person telling us 1600 years ago that my own approach to Genesis was arrogance, the kind that might turn a person from his faith. This, it turned out, was a little too on the nose and the first crack in my proverbial armor. I began circulating the quote among friends, believers and non-believers alike, and thought about it constantly. Around the same time, I attended a talk at our law school with Peter Thiel. This was 2011, and Thiel was a well-known venture capitalist, but hardly a household name. He would later blurb my book and become a good friend, but I had no idea what to expect at the time. He spoke first in personal terms, arguing that we were increasingly tracked into cutthroat professional competitions. We would compete for appellate clerkships and then Supreme Court clerkships. We would compete for jobs at elite law firms and then for partnerships at those same places. At each juncture, he said, our jobs would offer longer work hours, social alienation from our peers, and work whose prestige would fail to make up for its meaninglessness. He also argued that his own world of Silicon Valley spent too little time on the technological breakthroughs that made life better, those in biology, energy, and transportation, and too much on things like software and mobile phones. Everyone could now tweet at each other or post photos on Facebook, but it took longer to travel to Europe. We had no cure for cognitive decline and dementia, and our energy use increasingly dirtied the planet. He saw these two trends, elite professionals trapped in hyper-competitive jobs and the technological stagnation of society, as connected. If technological innovation were actually driving real prosperity, our elites wouldn't feel increasingly competitive with one another over a dwindling number of prestigious outcomes. Peter's talk remains the most significant moment of my life at Yale Law School. He articulated a feeling that had until then remained unformed, that I was obsessed with achievement in se, not as an end to something meaningful, but to win a social competition. My worry that I had prioritized striving over character took on a heightened significance. Striving for what? I didn't even know why I cared about the things I cared about. I fancied myself educated, enlightened, and especially wise about the ways of the world, at least compared with most of the people from my hometown. Yet I was obsessed with obtaining professional credentials, a clerkship with a federal judge, and then an associate position at a prestigious firm that I didn't understand. I hated my limited exposure to legal practice. I looked to the future and realized that I'd been running a desperate race where the first prize was a job I hated. I began immediately planning for a career outside the law, which is why I spent less than 2 years after graduation as a practicing attorney. But Peter left me with one more thing. He was possibly the smartest person I'd ever met, but he was also a Christian. He defied the social template I had constructed, that dumb people were Christians and smart ones atheists. I began to wonder where his religious belief came from, which led me to René Girard, the French philosopher whom he apparently studied under at Stanford. Girard's thought is rich enough that any effort to summarize will fail to do the man justice. His theory of mimetic rivalry, that we tend to compete over the things that other people want, spoke directly to some of the pressures I experienced at Yale. But it was his related theory of the scapegoat and what it revealed about Christianity that made me reconsider my faith. One of Girard's central insights is that human civilizations are often, perhaps even always, founded on a scapegoat myth, an act of violence committed against someone who has wronged the broader community, retold as a sort of origin story for the community. Girard points out that Romulus and Remus are like Christ, divine children, and like Moses, placed in a river basket to save them from a jealous king. There was a time when I bristled at such comparisons, worried that any seeming lack of originality on the part of Scripture meant that it couldn't be true. This is a common rhetorical device of the new atheists. Point to some creation story, like the flood narrative in the Epic of Gilgamesh, as evidence that the sacred authors have plagiarized their story from some earlier civilization. It reasonably follows that if the biblical story is lifted from somewhere else, the version in the Bible may not be the word of God after all. But Girard rejects this inference and leans into the similarities between biblical stories and those from other civilizations. To Girard, the Christian story contains a crucial difference, a difference that reveals something, quote, hidden since the foundation of the world. In the Christian telling, the ultimate scapegoat has not wronged the civilization has wronged him. The victim of the madness of crowds is, as Christ was, infinitely powerful, able to prevent his own murder, and perfectly innocent, undeserving of the rage and violence of the crowd. In Christ, we see our efforts to shift blame and our own inadequacies onto a victim for what they are, a moral failing projected violently upon someone else. Christ is the scapegoat who reveals our imperfections and forces us to look at our own flaws rather than blame our society's chosen victims. People come to truth in different ways, and I'm sure some will find this account unsatisfying. But in 2013, it captured so well the psychology of my generation, especially its most privileged inhabitants. Mired in the swamp of social media, we identified a scapegoat and digitally pounced. We were keyboard warriors, unloading on people via Facebook and Twitter, blind to our own problems. We fought over jobs we didn't actually want while pretending we didn't fight for them at all. And the end result, for me at least, was that I had lost the language of virtue. I felt more shame over failing in a law school exam than I did about losing my temper with my girlfriend. That all had to change. It was time to stop scapegoating and focus on what I could do to improve things. These very personal reflections on faith, conformity, and virtue coincided with a writing project that would eventually become a very public success. Hillbilly Elegy, the hybrid book of memoir and social commentary I published in 2016. I look back on earlier drafts of the book and realize just how much I changed from 2013 to 2015. I started the book angry, resentful of my mother especially, and confident in my own abilities. There's the vengeful son, angry with his mother. I finished it a little humbled and very unsure about what to do to solve so many of our social problems. And the answer I landed on, as unsatisfactory then as it is now, is that you can't actually solve our social problems. The best you can hope for is to reduce them or to blunt their effects. I noticed during my research that many of those social problems came from behavior for which social scientists and policy experts had a different vocabulary. On the right, the conversation often turned to culture and personal responsibility, the ways in which individuals or communities held back their own progress. And though it seemed obvious to me that there was something dysfunctional about some of the places in which I'd grown up, the discourse on the right seemed a little heartless. It failed to account for the fact that destructive behaviors were almost always tragedies with terrible consequences. It's one thing to wag your finger at another person for failing to act a certain way, but it is something else to feel the weight of the misery that comes from those actions. The left's intellectuals focused much more around the structural and external problems facing families like mine. The difficulty in finding jobs and the lack of funding for certain types of resources. And while I agreed that more resources were often necessary, there seemed to me a sense in which our most destructive behaviors persisted, even flourished in times of material comfort. The economic left was often more compassionate, but theirs was a kind of compassion, devoid of any expectation, that reeked of giving up. A compassion that assumes a person is disadvantaged to the point of hopelessness is like sympathy for a zoo animal, and I had no use for it. And as I reflected on these competing views of the world and the wisdom and shortcomings of each, I felt desperate for a worldview that understood our bad behavior as simultaneously social and individual, structural and moral. That recognized that we are products of our environment, that we have a responsibility to change that environment, but that we are still moral beings with individual duties. One that could speak against rising rates of divorce and addiction, not as sanitized conclusions about their negative social externalities, but with moral outrage. And I realized eventually that I had already been exposed to that worldview. It was my mama's Christianity. And the name it gave for the behaviors I had seen destroy lives and communities was sin. I remembered one of my least favorite passages from Scripture, Numbers 14:18, in a new light. The Lord is slow to anger, abounding in love, and forgiving sin and rebellion. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation. A decade ago, I took this as evidence of a vengeful, irrational God. Yet who could look at the statistics on what our early 21st century culture and politics had wrought, the misery, the rising suicide rates, the deaths of despair in the richest country on earth, and doubt that the sins of parents had any effect on their children? And here again, the words of St. Augustine echoed from a millennium and a half earlier, articulating a truth I had felt for a long time but hadn't spoken. This is a passage from City of God where Augustine summarizes the debauchery of Rome's ruling class. Quoting, "This is our concern, that every man be able to increase his wealth so as to supply his daily prodigalities, and so that the powerful may subject the weak for their own purposes. Let the poor court the rich for a living, and that under their protection they may enjoy a sluggish tranquility. And let the rich abuse the poor as their dependents, to minister to their pride. Let the people applaud not those who protect their interests, but those who provide them with pleasure. Let no severe duty be commanded, no impurity forbidden. Let kings estimate their prosperity, not by the righteousness, but by the servility of their subjects. Let the provinces stand loyal to the kings, not as moral guides, but as lords of their possessions and purveyors of their pleasures, not with a hearty reverence, but a crooked and servile fear. Let the laws take cognizance rather of the injury done to another man's property than of that done to one's own person. If a man be a nuisance to his neighbor or injure his property, family, or person, let him be actionable. But in his own affairs, let everyone with impunity do what he will in company with his own family and with those who willingly join him. Let there be a plentiful supply of public prostitutes for everyone who wishes to use them, but especially for those who are too poor to keep one for their private use. Let there be erected houses of the largest and most ornate description. In these let there be provided the most sumptuous banquets, where everyone who pleases may, by day or night, play, drink, vomit, dissipate. Let there be everywhere heard the rustling of dancers, the loud, immodest laughter of the theater. Let a succession of the most cruel and the most voluptuous pleasures maintain a perpetual excitement. If such happiness is distasteful to any, let him be branded as a public enemy. And if any attempt to modify or put an end to it, let him be silenced, banished, put an end to. Let these be reckoned the true gods, who procure for the people this condition of things and preserve it when once possessed. Close quote. It was the best criticism of our modern age I'd ever read. A society oriented entirely towards consumption and pleasure, spurning duty and virtue. Not long after I first read these words, my friend Orrin Cass published a book arguing that American policymakers have focused far too much on promoting consumption as opposed to productivity or some other measure of well-being. The reaction, criticizing Orrin for daring to push policies that might lower consumption, almost proved the argument. Yes, I found myself saying, Orrin's preferred policies might reduce per capita consumption, but that's precisely the point. Our society is more than the sum of its economic statistics. If people die sooner in the midst of historic levels of consumption, then perhaps our focus on consumption is misguided.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a particularly important point. That there are much more important things than like material well-being or economic productivity or consumption. Whatever metric you want to use, GDP or average income or the minimum wage or whatever. I think it all fundamentally it's the health of a nation is. I think Thomas Carlyle pointed this out a long time ago that the health of a nation. Oh yeah, he was raging against statistics. That the health of the nation is an aesthetic judgment, fundamentally. So yeah. Anyway.
I'm catching up on some of the chats here. It's apparently he had it misspelled. It's Galernter. There it is.
Galernter.
John MC is the resident linguist, and so I must defer to him. He says it's Galernter, even though JD had it spelled Galernter with an extra N in there.
Galerntner himself says Galerntner.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, it says it means learned, educated, or scholarly in German.
Well, cool.
Okay. Taylor Brown said, dare I say, Bukele and the Philosopher King vibes. And Pete Quinones said, now I want to go to confession and then accept the Eucharist. Yeah, this is the VP. Okay. Yeah, Peter Thiel's apprentice. And indeed, it was this insight more than any other that ultimately led not just to Christianity, but to Catholicism.
Buck Johnson's in the house.
What's up, Buck Johnson? He's a cunning linguist as well. Indeed, you are.
Don't tell Josiah.
Yeah, right. Here it comes. And indeed, it was this insight more than any other that ultimately led not just to Christianity, but to Catholicism. Despite my mama's unfamiliarity with the liturgy, the Roman and Italian cultural influences, and the foreign pope, I slowly began to see Catholicism as the closest expression of her kind of Christianity. Obsessed with virtue, but cognizant of the fact that virtue is formed in the context of a broader community. Sympathetic with the meek and poor of the world without treating them primarily as victims. Protective of children and families and with the things necessary to ensure they thrive. And above all, a faith centered around a Christ who demands perfection of us even as he loves us unconditionally and forgives easily. It was this insight that took me from a few informal conversations with a couple of Dominican friars to a more serious period of study with one in particular. I almost wish it hadn't been so gradual, that there had been an aha moment that made me realize I just had to become Catholic. There were some weird coincidences that hastened my decision. One came about a year ago at a conference I attended with largely conservative intellectuals. Late at night at the hotel bar, I questioned a conservative Catholic writer about his criticism of the Pope. My growing view is that too many American Catholics have failed to show proper deference to the papacy, treating the Pope as a political figure to be criticized or praised according to their whims. While he admitted that some Catholics went too far, he defended his more measured approach, when suddenly a wine glass seemed to leap from a stable place behind the bar and crashed on the floor in front of us. We both stared at each other in silence for a bit, a little startled by what we'd just seen, before ending our conversation abruptly and excusing ourselves to turn in for the night. Another took place in Washington, D.C. during a particularly grueling week of travel. I hadn't seen my family in a few days and hadn't even had the time to call my toddler on the phone. In moments like this, I sometimes listened to a beautiful setting of a psalm performed during Pope Francis's visit to Georgia in 2016 by an Orthodox choir. I know exactly what stream that is that he's talking about, or what piece that is. Let me drop this in the chat here for Taylor Brown. There is the link, and the link is also in the description of the video, and it'll be in the podcast description as well. I listened to it on the train from New York to Washington, where I knew a Dominican friar whom I decided to ask to coffee. He invited me to visit his community, where I heard the friars chanting, apparently, the same psalm. Now, I know it's easy to make the skeptic's case. JD watched a video of a priest chanting a Bible verse, and then he emailed a member of a religious order who later chanted the same thing. But to quote Samuel L. Jackson from Pulp Fiction, "You're judging this shit the wrong way. I mean, it could be that God stopped the bullets, or he changed Coke to Pepsi, he found my fucking car keys. You don't judge shit like this based on merit. Now, whether or not what we experienced was an, according to Hoyle, miracle is insignificant. What is significant is that I felt the touch of God." So yes, during little moments over the last few years, I've felt the touch of God. As much as it would make for a better story, I cannot say that any of these things made me stand up and say, it's time to convert. The move was more incremental. I became convinced that Mama would accept Catholic theology even if its cultural trappings made her feel uneasy. There were words of St. Augustine and Gerard in the example of my Uncle Dan, who married into our family but demonstrated Christian virtue more thoroughly than any person I'd met. There were good friends who made me see that I didn't need to abandon my reason before I approached the altar. I came eventually to believe that the teachings of the Catholic Church were true, but it happened slowly and unevenly. There were things that made it harder even after I had made up my mind. The sexual abuse crisis made me wonder whether joining the church meant subjecting my child to an institution that cared more for its own reputation than the protection of its members. Working through these feelings delayed my conversion for at least a few months. There was a concern that it would be unfair to my wife. She hadn't married a Catholic, and I felt like I was throwing her into it. But from the beginning, she supported my decision, so I can't blame the delay on her. I was received into the Catholic Church on a beautiful day in mid-August in a private ceremony not far from my house. I woke up on the day of my reception a little apprehensive, worried that I was making a big mistake. For all of my doubts about how Mama might have reacted, it was one of her favorite phrases that I heard in her voice ringing in my ears that morning. Time to shit or get off the pot. I was baptized and I received my first communion. I found it all very beautiful, though I should admit that I still felt uneasy about something so far removed from my youthful church-going experiences. Much of my family came to support me. My 2-year-old son, one of my favorite parts about the church is that it encourages parents to bring their kids, chomped on a lot of goldfish crackers. At the end of it, the Dominican friars who welcomed me hosted my friends and family for coffee and donuts. I try to keep a little humility about how little I know and how inadequate a Christian I really am. I'm most comfortable engaging with people around ideas. If you can't read something and debate it, I've always been a little less interested. But the church isn't just about ideas and St. Augustine, whom I chose as my patron. It's about the heart as well and the community of believers. It's about going to Mass and receiving the sacraments, even when it's difficult or awkward to do so. It's about so many things that I'm ignorant of in the process of becoming less ignorant over time. My wife has said that the business of converting to Catholicism, studying and thinking about it, was, quote, good for you. And I came eventually to see that she was right, at least in some cosmic sense. I realized that there was a part of me, the best part, that took its cues from Catholicism. It was the part of me that demanded that I treat my son with patience and made me feel terrible when I failed. That demanded that I moderate my temper with everyone, but especially my family. That demanded that I care about how I rated as a husband and father than as an income earner. That demanded that I sacrifice professional prestige for the interests of family. That demanded that I let go of grudges and forgive even those who wronged me. As St. Paul says in his epistle to the Philippians, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things. It was the Catholic part of my heart and mind that demanded that I think on the things that actually mattered. And if I wanted that part of me to be nurtured and to grow, I needed to do more than read the occasional book of theology or reflect on my own shortcomings. I needed to pray more, to participate in the sacramental life of the church, to confess and to repent publicly, no matter how awkward that might be. And I needed grace. And I needed, in other words, to become Catholic, not merely to think about it. that is the presumptive next vice president of the United States.
Heretic.
There's something that's delicious about a couple of ortho bros sitting here reading about him joining the Catholic Church.
No, I'm obviously I have my opinions, but I'm pretty pro-Catholic.
Yeah, right. I didn't used to be. I came from a pretty similar background to him in terms of my perspective on the Catholic Church.
Yep. Yeah, me too.
And now it's like the way that I think I've started saying it is there's a reason that I'm Orthodox. There's a reason I decided to join the Orthodox Church, but I've got a lot of love for the Catholics out there. Do you have any thoughts? Anything that struck you as we were going through that?
Well, just that I'm sure this is the case for a lot of people. I mean, there's people saying as much in the chat, but there's a lot of parallels to his, his development and his journey, if you want to use that word, to like us. Mm-hmm. A lot of us went through similar, thinking and pondering. Yeah. There's a lot to relate to.
Mm-hmm. Something that popped out at me that I was going to say, and then I forgot what it was, and I just remembered what it was. He mentioned his uncle, who was he'd mentioned him earlier, that he was the one Catholic he knew, and all he knew of him was that he was just a really good Christian man. And I think it's maybe a little, it might seem trite, but it's actually really kind of profound in a situation like this. Think about the impact that guy had on him and his conversion and the significance that plays. He had no idea that he, as his uncle, just being a good Christian man, was making an indelible impact on the future vice president of the United States. And, I mean, if the arc of history continues its trajectory, this is the future president of the United States. He's tabbed as the heir apparent for 2028. Lots can happen in 4 years, but I bet you the betting markets for president in 2028, JD Vance is probably the leader. So I think right now everything is very I don't know, everyone's hot. Everyone's really hyped up right now. And everyone's super black-pilled about the RNC convention. They're really like, oh, we just everyone wants blood in some form or another. Everyone wants blood for the blood gods.
Stop.
Yes.
No blood gods.
Yes.
We don't worship blood gods.
No.
I did see a really interesting. Maybe I'll send it to you. You may have seen it. A really interesting thread that relates to the what's it called? What is going on with my brain right now? The RNC. That's what I was looking for. That I think is interesting. I just sent it to you on Discord. But no blood gods.
Mm-hmm. Instead of spending all that time ranting and screeching, you could be doing as old JD's uncle here did, and just being a good Christian man.
Yeah.
It seems simple, it's boring, it's not sexy, but those types of actions, you never have any idea how much those types of actions are going to ring into the future. Okay, so here's the thread here. Will Spencer, Wren of Men. He says, one thing to keep in mind, guys, is that Trump wasn't even supposed to be at the RNC. Let the reader understand. So he has a picture of Harmeet Dillon and Amber Rose. He says, P.S. If you believe the narrative that had Trump died, Nikki Haley would be the presumptive nominee, these performances make much more sense. And then, did you want to go into this other one?
No, that's as far as I read.
Okay.
Was just those first two, and I was like, huh, that's an interesting thought. And then I had to scramble down to get on here to jump on the stream, but I had just seen it. I'm like, that does make a lot of. I don't know who's in charge of like putting together the convention. Is it Trump? Is it Trump's team?
I would imagine that it's like he's not directly involved in it, but he has people who are appointed to that. It would be I saw the the lady's name. The two guys who were appointed, the guy and a lady who were appointed to it, they were both appointed on recommendations from Trump. I think this is something I've got a bunch of stuff on this to share for the Astrolabe tomorrow. Jason Whitlock had a really interesting thread on this, and I've seen a few other people mention it. I think if you look at the people who are controlling the Republican Party right now, and you recognize that their main priority at this point in time, the one priority that everything else hinges upon, is getting Donald Trump elected. If you're grading them on that, then every single thing that they're doing makes sense. Everyone wants politics to be a game of purity. It's not. It's dirty, corrupt, yucky game.
The past, 36 hours has been quite... You need to stop rocking that chair. She's coloring next to me. The last 36 hours have been a wild ride on Twitter, watching people get really excited and then really black-pilled and then really excited and then really black-pilled. And it's just been up and down all day. Guys, relax.
Yeah, right.
Enjoy the circus.
It's so entertaining. There's so many, the memes have just been next level.
Yeah, right.
Did you realize that there was a guy who was shot at in Milwaukee today? There was some guy that it wasn't local police, it was Ohio police who were there. They took down some guy, shot him and killed him. Who was, I don't know, he had a gun, or he was threatening in some sense. Isn't that crazy? That happened today. You had no idea. Yeah. Outside the RNC.
Interesting.
I mean, how many people have been shot outside of major national conventions in the past, history of the country? And one happened today, and I guarantee you, a tiny fraction of the population is even aware of it.
I had no idea until you told me just now.
Right. So, there's a sense in which things are getting darker and more violent and worse.
Which I am on record just the other day predicting would probably happen.
Mm-hmm.
Because you didn't get the big catharsis on Saturday.
And yet, at the same time, you have the guy who wrote what we just read, who is the presumptive vice president. I mean, so now, any of you who watch this, any of you who listen to this, keep this character in the back of your mind. Anytime you're looking at anything that Vance is doing or saying. I'm don't be retarded. I'm not saying because Vance wrote this, he is the, I don't know, reincarnation of Christ here to save us all. He is our Messiah. This is obviously not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that when you're evaluating him, when you're thinking about him, you're trying to understand different things that he's done. Understand that the person who's doing whatever that is also the person who wrote something like this.
You know what's starting to bother me? It's starting to bother me. I see it a lot from our circles and even our intimate circle. This kind of talking about, whether it be Tucker or JD Vance or the PayPal Mafia or Trump or whatever. Can we just stop being non-committal and can we just say these are our guys?
I'm ready to say that JD Vance is very clearly our guy.
And we'll just say Trump. Trump's our guy too.
Yeah. Yes,
you guys
Trump,
were talking last night about okay, the narrative's up for grabs.
Mm-hmm.
We can start crafting the future here. So Trump's our guy. PayPal, whatever, they're our guys. Tucker's our guy. Vance is our guy.
Mm-hmm.
Can we just start saying that?
I'm down.
Because everyone likes to talk about them, and theory sell about them, and they have been, including you.
Mm-hmm.
The past few months, we're well, no, I'm not saying that these are our guys, but we could align our interests with their interests and stuff. Just say they're our guys. Let's just do that. Can we just do that now?
Yes. If I had seen, I'll say this in my own defense. If I had read this about JD Vance 6 months ago or whatever, when we were first talking about him, I would have been okay, yes, he is clearly our guy. And I would have been fucking over the moon when he was announced. Now it's just very clear. It's very clear. If you can't recognize him as our guy, then I don't even know how you have friends.
But Matt, he married a Jeep.
Oh my God. These guys are good. I have had the dumbest human beings to ever log on to the internet have been populating the replies on my tweets lately. It's so fucking annoying.
I've been muting and blocking so many people the past few days. I keep waiting for the algorithm to like kind of sort itself out, and it's not. They just keep coming.
Yeah.
All the goblins are, yeah, right.
Just God, like I like moved away from libertarian communities for a reason. I don't want to be around that whole energy. You guys, the word faggot was conceived with you guys in mind.
Yeah, right.
Tucker is clearly our guy. Trump is clearly our guy. Taylor Brown says, Trump nearly took a bullet for us, and I don't care about the noise right now. He's my guy. Yes. Trump is our guy. JD Vance is our guy. Tucker is our guy. Elon Musk is our guy.
Yes.
The world these guys want to live in is the world that I want to live in. Let's get to that world, and then we can hash out our differences. Would that we lived in a world where we could hash out those sorts of differences.
Oh, but Matt, did you hear? It's just like, okay, it was... So JD Vance gets announced as VP or whatever, presumptive VP, whatever that means, yesterday, and seeing all the different contingents of the right start picking apart their pet issues and just like going off the deep end in totally different directions. It's really interesting to see, like, we don't really have a lot in common with a lot of these guys.
Yeah.
You know, we had a little bit, like, we have enough in common. Maybe we've read some of the same books or whatever. And maybe we have a similar critique of this or that or politics or whatever, managerialism. Is it all? Go down the list. But, man, priorities are totally different. Like, okay, I was seeing, okay, the racists are mad because he's married to a Jeep. Let's see, what, like, as if he's supposed to just, like, abandon his wife and family now.
Right.
Like, okay. So he's married to a Jeep. They were mad. What else? He touched the wall once. So all of the Jew worshippers were mad.
He's invested in a company that does mRNA research.
Okay, so that's another bad thing.
Yep.
Let's see what else.
He was never Trump 8 years ago.
Oh yeah, right. He was never Trump. As if like 8 years. Like, okay, 8 years. That was 8 years ago. You know?
Right. Right.
There was do you guys not remember 8 years ago? It was a totally different game.
I tweeted something like, I said, some guy who voted for Bernie in 2016 is like, oh, it's all over. Vance was anti-Trump in 2015. Like, what?
Yeah, right. Furthermore, okay, who's next? I see some of the shoot, this is kind of some of the ortho dorks on Twitter who are like, oh well, you guys are they're kind of doing the, oh, I won't say his name. They're kind of doing the thing where they're talking about, because everyone being Antichrist, like channeling the energy of the Antichrist. Like, you guys got to be careful not to fall off onto the temptations to the right. I'm like, you guys just want to lose, okay? And then I see the trad cats are getting mad because he, at one point in like a brief interview, said that he wasn't interested at that time in like banning abortion pills or something.
Yeah, it was like Plan B. Like, he doesn't. She was like, do you think that Plan B should be available for people to purchase? And he was like, yeah, I do. Like, that was like the answer. Just kind of a throwaway.
Right, and then people were like, oh, he's pro. So the trad cats are getting pissed because he's pro-abortion. And then I was just reading a Lefty article, a hit piece that was published today about JD Vance saying he wants a universal ban on abortion across the country. And I'm like, okay, so, like, okay, let's, to the trad cats and the people who are claiming that JD Vance is like pro-abortion. because he's like, yeah, okay, whatever, plan B. Hypothetically, if abortion was banned all across America, but plan B was still available, would you take that as a win? Or are you just going to let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and you guys are just going to keep losing?
Yeah, let's get abortion banned across America, and then let's take on Plan B.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be nice if, like, the debate was, should there or should there not be Plan B?
Uh-huh.
Instead of, like, 9 months or whatever?
This is...
You know what I mean?
It's libertarianism. This is all this is.
That's exactly what it is.
It's just libertarianism except racist, or libertarianism except sexist, or libertarianism except Christian, or libertarianism except pagan.
Yeah.
Is that Plan A? Well done, Buck. Well done. I'll remind you guys, the thing that I shared at the very beginning, I did it for a reason. St. Paisios. And they said they're all the same. They're all... He says, vote for the one you believe it is best, the one who loves God and our country. Do you believe that JD Vance loves God and loves our country? They say, well, they're all the same. They're all the same. Okay, well, he says, well, all olive trees are the same. All of them are affected by the same disease called Dacos. However, some are affected 100% by it, others 80%, and others 50%. Since we are in need of olive trees, since we are in need of people who operate the government, we have to look for the ones that are affected the least. When you go to vote, we should always bear in mind two things: how much the candidate loves God and is thus a conscious member of the church, and how much he loves his country and looks solely after its interests and not its own. And these are relative measures. They're relative to the options that are there available. You can't say, no, this guy shouldn't be there. Hypothetical non-existent person should be there.
Yeah, right.
This is not engaging in reality. This is not being a good citizen of your nation. As a Christian, you have a responsibility to be a responsible citizen of your nation. You have a civic duty. That's part of being a Christian. We have a saint saying, take the lesser of take the least bad option. You have a responsibility to support the least bad option that's available. If someone uses another criterion to vote other than these things, he is acting out of self-interest and is not behaving like a true Christian. Later on, divine justice will allow him to pay for his mistake. That's not a throwaway sentence. That's a strong statement. I know some of you out there may not, if you're not Orthodox, you're not Catholic, you don't value the words of the saints the way we may. You could take this as, this is a very sober, holy man. I don't care what religious background you come from, you recognize he's a very sober religious man. So all of this, like, it's possible to walk and chew gum at the same time, okay? Like, we can very clearly identify the situation. We can very clearly make a determination of which is better. And we can earnestly support and hope for and work to make something come about, while also recognizing that our hope is not in princes.
Right.
Our hope is not in princes. Therefore, you shouldn't be a better dad. Our hope is not in princes. Therefore, you shouldn't be a responsible CEO of your company. Our hope is not in princes. Therefore, you shouldn't be a patron of your community. Or you shouldn't look for good patrons or encourage patrons. This is the same role, just in different domains. There will be princes. There will always be princes. And we would rather have, and it is better to have, and you have a Christian responsibility to support and promote the best options that are available. Grading on the curve of, does he love his country and does he love God? Taylor Brown says, democracy is what we have. Democracy forces polities into consequentialism and calculated choices in pursuit of the good. Yes, if we live in a not democracy, then we can evaluate the choices in front of us differently. Right now, we live in a democracy. Yeah, but when it's a constitutional republic, fuck up. Shut up. It's a democracy. We live in a democracy, whether you want to or not. We would like to get to not democracy. But it turns out the reality of democracy is that the way to get to not democracy is through democracy. It's a paradox. It's true. There is, and really, the inevitability is that we're going to get not democracy from democracy. It doesn't matter how we go about it. That's going to be the outcome. The question is whether it's going to be good not democracy or bad not democracy. Because both of those things are very real as well. If you just say, oh, fuck it, get rid of democracy, who knows what's going to step into its place? And there are things that are much worse than democracy. So for now, we have democracy. And we have to operate within what we have now and make the best choice based on what's available. And I cannot wrap my mind around anybody who thinks that there was a better, more plausible option for VP in the current situation right now, not in fanciful idea land, but in actual real reality, than JD Vance. That doesn't mean JD Vance is a perfect person. JD Vance is going to save us all magically, and now we don't have to do anything or worry about anything anymore. Of course not. I think it was in the stream this morning, Josiah was saying, they all run together. Josiah was saying that JD Vance is a micro-dialectic. Whether he is sincere and authentic, or whether he's entirely cynical and Machiavellian, he is going to be subjected to a constant sequence of choices. And each time that he makes a choice, the climate within which he makes that choice is going to inform the choices that he makes.
But Matt, the synagogue of Satan loves him.
Oh my God. So
Get the fuck out of here, dude.
You are properly named Christopher Shame.
Maybe he's joking. Maybe we'll give him a second.
Yeah,
Maybe he's joking.
Yes.
You're just memeing. Let us know. If not, go away.
Yes. We'll know shortly. Unless he's a very good memer.
Yeah, right.
We'll see now. Now I have to wait to see if we have a true artist on our hands. Or is he just a retard?
I was gonna say something. What was I gonna say? Oh yeah, Colin had a point here. He said, and since no one knows how much a vote counts, go ahead and vote. You know, and this is something we just talked to Colin a couple of weeks ago on his show about voting, and yeah, okay, ban him. So we had a conversation with Colin a couple weeks ago on his show about, and we talked about voting. Like, should you vote? I historically have not been one to vote, and I have, when I was first kind of becoming politically online, the Yarvin writing about the clear pill, I thought that was really influential on me, and it made a lot of sense, like why you shouldn't participate and add energy into this thing. But I don't know, man. I'm coming around to Colin's point that don't you want to be consistent with like your values and stuff like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Cursed World Problems podcast. It was like 2 weeks ago, maybe. You and I were on there with Colin. You guys should go watch that. We talked about the voting thing. Like, it's like on one hand, yeah, it's all fake. It doesn't matter. Like, but then on the other hand, it's like it doesn't take anything.
Yeah, right. You know, it's literally half a block from my house.
Right.
Where the voting is. Like, okay, I can do that.
Yeah, go stand in line and talk to your neighbors for a minute. You know?
Right.
Go get a cool sticker. Take your kids. Get your kids all excited about being an American. We're Americans.
Yeah, right.
This is what we do. We have a say in the way our communities are governed. And that say isn't restricted to the ballot box, but we're consistent. We participate in this. We participate in the different systems within our culture to try to make them all better in whatever way.
And you could also just do like, if you don't want to leave your house, you can do the absentee thing and just mail it in.
Yeah,
you don't
right.
have to leave your house.
Yeah, you get even less friction that way. They love the absentee ballots these days.
Yeah, that's right. But to that, okay, talking about that dude who was commenting here a minute ago, did you ban him or did you just put him in timeout?
I said hide his comments on the channel. I don't know what that does.
Okay. So he's presumably still listening. Dude. He says, The synagogue of Satan loves him, referring to JD Vance, and then follows that up with, isn't he or is he not beloved by Israel? Go off, Matt, about how gay that is.
See, the problem with this is not that we have some great love for Israel.
No, not at all.
I could not give two shits less about Israel. And I am fully aware of everything that is entailed with Israel.
Yes. We've been around here for a while.
Yes. I've watched the videos. I've read the things. I believe all the things. But all this is just a dick measuring contest. It's people complaining about things that they don't control to no end. There's no goal to this. What's the goal? Oh, Israel likes him. Okay, so we have to get the politician who isn't beloved by Israel.
Good luck.
Which one?
Yeah, right.
We're dealing with the ones that are at our disposal right now. If there was one who had all of JD Vance's qualifications and was not beloved by Israel, then I would say that guy. But they don't exist.
That guy would never, and that guy would, even if that guy did exist, it's not like he would get anywhere.
Right.
Right now. It just wouldn't happen.
Someone posted how I think he's received $167,000 from AIPAC or something. And someone else replied and was like, that's not very much money. And he was like, how much has Massey taken? And like, when I'm evaluating a VP pick, my primary metric is not, is he Thomas Massey? If Thomas Massey was the VP candidate, yes, that'd be great. Let's get Thomas Massey. He's not. Was never rumored to be, was never going to be. He has his role. We're not living in like a choose your own adventure video game. That's what these types of comments, when someone comes and they start talking about this, the reason why I'm going to I just don't even want to engage with you, because it's not the substance of the issue. It's the fact that you are revealing you don't have the rationality or the intellect to actually have a serious conversation. There's no point.
Yeah, like, it's really, these guys, they're just like, as I've said before, they're so like, their minds are just poisoned. They're not thinking straight. Like, it's the same impulse. You know, the libertarians who are like, it's the state, that's the problem. Or the commies who say it's the bourgeois.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's the racists who say it's the blacks or the Jews or whatever. Like, you're picking
or
your
the women.
Man. Yeah, or the women. The red pill dudes. You're picking your boogeyman so you can just be at home. You can be right at home and not have to do anything.
Yes, exactly. I mean, if you want to go out and you want to start a campaign and you want to put your face on it and you want to go attack that head on, I mean, I wouldn't recommend it for your own sake. I think that's very silly in 2024 to decide that that's the thing that's the hill you're going to very publicly exterminate yourself on.
Yeah, no kidding.
There's zero utility in it. Like, the worst thing you're going to do is you're just going to give them an opportunity to justify every single mythology that they want to justify in the first place.
And I mean, if we're being honest here, if Israel wanted to give us here at the Real King Pilled Show a fuck ton of money, you know we are going to take it.
That's
and we're going to split it with our buddies, and we're going to invest in a whole bunch of businesses, and we're going to get shit going.
Exactly.
If they want to give us money, we'll take their money, and we'll talk nice about them for a year or whatever.
If our narrative content here just shifts suddenly, all of a sudden,
you know why?
You know why?
We got a bunch of money.
Yep.
And you should probably join the Discord because you might get your hands on some of it.
Right. You should hit us up. We will spread the wealth. Josiah says they just want excuses. Excuses are easy. Now, see, okay, Tommy in the chat, he says, here's the deal with voting, guys. I live in Texas, and in order to vote, I have to leave the house. Leaving the house is against my values. See, I can't argue with that. I think anything that Tommy says is right by default. And in this case, I got to give it to him. I live in Texas as well, and leaving the house is I haven't enjoyed leaving the house less anywhere that I've lived than in Texas. I don't really like being in the house, so it's quite a conundrum. I suffer a lot here. Willie Jenkins, member for 6 months of the King Pilled. He says, off subject, I watched Dark on Netflix. Damn good mental gymnastics. Good entertainment is hard to come by.
Great show. Great show.
Cooper has
Probably
told me I need to watch it.
favorite
I haven't gotten
show
around to it.
of all time. It's certainly in the top 3. Great show.
Buck Johnson says, Tucker, JD is hated by every terrible person I know in Washington. We've already seen Mitt Romney and Bill Kristol have shit their undies over it. So I'll just say,
Tucker also said, JD's probably one of the few people who actually, maybe one of like 2 people in DC who actually has a happy marriage.
Yes, that's right. I had that. I don't remember where that was. I had that as well. And like, these are meaningful indicators from meaningful people.
Yeah.
I saw people passing around the photo of him with Lindsey Graham sitting there smiling and thumbs up. And they're like, oh, she. And they didn't see Tucker's tweet about it, apparently, where he said Lindsey Graham did this picture with him and then was lobbying hard against him behind the scenes before the announcement was made. This is like, you have to exist with these people.
Yeah, all these people are perfectly pleasant, I'm sure, in person to your face.
Right.
You know?
Right. And there's no reason to not be the same way. Like, what are you going to accomplish by just going in there and pissing everyone off and being a dick to everyone? You might as well not be there. There's no point in approaching any of this that way. So you could tell the guys that get all butthurt about this, they're not adults. They don't live in the real world. They don't meet people or like engage with human beings. They don't understand how to be successful in anything. You can't be successful in any sort of agenda along these lines. Like, if you want someone to represent your interests in any way, they have to play the game. And then it's a question from our perspective, to what extent are they playing the game? And to what extent do they sincerely believe in those things? So you have to consider all the other indicators.
Okay. Like Bukele. Look at Bukele, for example. Widely successful. That's the kind of guy I want, you know?
He started from a leftist party.
Right, and, he touched the wall.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, everyone has to touch the wall right now, okay? That's what you got to do if you're going to make it anywhere. Yes, it would be really nice if someone just, stood on principle and be like, I'm not touching your fucking wall. But that's the world we live in right now. If you want to get anywhere in politics, you got to touch the wall. And because he touched the wall, look at the success he's been able to have in El Salvador.
Mm-hmm.
If he didn't touch the wall, he probably never would have gotten there. Mm-hmm. So it's don't freak out about the wall, guys. It's not a big deal.
What's funny is that, to me, I'm like, it's a wall. Go kiss the wall? But these guys are like, it's a spiritual totem. It has so much power.
They're the ones who are imbibing it with all of this meaning and power.
Yeah. I'm like, it's a fucking wall. Okay, yeah, you want me to stand here? Photo op? Okay. Look at a wall. Huh, there's an ant running on it.
Stupid little hat on my head.
Yeah, right. And here's the thing. If there was a guy who was just a full-scale believer, just a diehard regime adherent, and he wanted to represent my interests in any little way, and he was the best option available in the field, then I would want him to represent my interests. I don't care who he's being paid by. I want him to represent my interests and make the world even just the tiniest bit better for my family. And if there's nobody else available and he's the last person left standing who is remotely, he's ticked 1 degree my direction and he's the only one there, yes, I'm going to support him because there's no one else available. Do you know who it's an indictment on that there's no one else available? Not him. It's an indictment on all of the people who didn't choose to actually try to move forward in any way. Who they didn't decide to go out and run for office or get themselves established with a company and buy people off or whatever they needed to do. It's an indictment on them. So if you don't like the current crop of candidates, get to work being a better one. I would love to have more people out there being a better one. I'd much rather have them doing that than just like angrily blackpilling into the void on Twitter.
I'm so over it, man. I honestly don't really want to hold. I almost want nothing to do with the right wingers. If that's who we're talking about, like the right wing Twitter, I'm just call me a lefty. I don't know. I don't like you guys.
Well, I will say that
talking about the racists and the
right.
The Goonics.
Yes, the Goonics. It turns out I've been affirmed in many ways the past few days, and one of the ways I've been affirmed is that all of the best people who I like the most are all really happy about JD Vance, or at least they're like realistic about him. They're like, yeah, like Andrew Torba said, he's someone we can work with. He has our ear. We can move him. We know people close to him. We can influence him. That's better than you could say for anyone else. Let's work on it. Keep moving forward. There's no point in demoralizing. So all the people who I was already inclined to like, they all had the correct opinion about JD Vance. All of the people who I was kind of a little, or the people who I think are the worst human beings in the world, they were all univocal in their denouncements of him.
Right. Yep.
So you guys feel free to go out there and carry water for Bill Kristol and Mitt Romney. You knock yourselves out. Someone replied to me and they were like, oh, Ben Shapiro liked him. Yeah, right. And I'm like, yeah, I like Ben Shapiro better than Bill Kristol.
Yeah, right.
That's not very hard for me. And I don't really like Ben Shapiro. So people's brains have just been broken. They've just been turned to mush.
Yeah.
Let me see what some of these, we got comments popping in here, so let's catch up on these. Josiah, you can only wield power if you're a cynical baddie, and therefore Vance et al. Are baddies, and I don't have power because I'm a goodie. Said as only Josiah could say it.
Right.
Colin says, even if it's rigged against you, wouldn't you rather go down fighting and with some balls in your integrity than to complain your way into the eternal goon cave?
Yeah.
What's up, Josh Ham? Buck Johnson says, how would you not know that Graham was being played in that photo rather than JD? Haters make a giant assumption. That's a really good point.
That's a good point. Yeah.
There's this actually was a rant that I had, I was making in my head the other day. I do this often. There's this posture of, you know how Yarvin had his thing about you kick the dog until it bites and then you shoot it.
Yeah, right.
And a lot of these guys have this kick the dog posture. They see themselves as relentlessly the underclass, relentlessly the one who is imposed upon, the one who is weak. Like that's a purity spiral comes from insecurity.
Right.
It seems interesting that the one drop rule only seems to work in a particular direction. Like whiteness is this like super fragile, effervescent little quality that just the tiniest little thing touches it. It all just falls apart and is completely corrupted.
Yeah, dude, like by that logic, I'm not white. By their logic.
Right. Like, wait, aren't white guys the ones? Aren't white guys the ones who were like riding on the horses going to conquer everyone and take their women?
Right.
Oh, you got a Pajit wife. He's corrupted. His kids. He didn't make white babies.
That was one thing that I kept seeing is like from the Doomers. They're just like, oh, he's extinguished his bloodline. I'm like, he just had kids. He's got 3 kids.
I guarantee you not a single one of these guys has kids. What about your bloodline?
Yeah, right.
Oh, the women suck. Oh, apparently you suck.
Just blowing it into a tissue.
You had to... Nick Fuentes was talking about how, like, he was like, no, you have a responsibility to marry a white woman, even if you don't like her. And you don't ever have to listen to her talk, but you have to dump seed into her. And I'm like, dude, why don't you work on getting a woman yourself before you're giving out marriage advice to people?
What is
I know there's one person who I want to hear from, and it's like the 23-year-old Mexican twink. That's the guy who should be giving dating advice.
What do we do with the whole Fuentes, you know? What do we make of that?
Well, it's very interesting how quickly he pivoted from Trump is completely beholden to Israel and we have to oppose him at all costs, and then all of a sudden Trump gets shot and he gets vroom. He's up there posting with the best of them, talking about how this is our guy and we've been behind him all along. And I don't know, man, like we can literally scroll your Twitter feed. You can see when it changed. I don't know. I have no desire to fight with them.
And I don't have any personal problems with Nick. I've never
Yeah.
talked to the dude, but I don't really. Certainly, his followers are the most insufferable people on the internet, and AF News and stuff. I blocked all that stuff forever ago. I'm tired of seeing black. All they do is blackmail.
Yep.
That's all they do.
Taylor Brown says acquiring power requires courting power.
Well, and furthermore, like you think, go back to the marriage thing, like, so JD Vance has a happy marriage with a smart woman, and they've got 3 kids. And you're telling me that that's not better than just, I don't know, taking some white chick that you hate, but you're gonna dump seed in her and you're gonna have white babies because you have a duty to that. Like, wouldn't the healthy, happy marriage be better?
I'm gonna rape my bloodline into persistence. Colin says they'll also take the picture to demoralize, and then you'll just submit to demoralization instead of maintaining an ounce of thumos. Right. They're trying to demoralize us. Yeah, you sound pretty demoralized. Looks like it's working. Maybe they should keep doing it. As long as you keep giving into their demoralization, they're going to keep demoralizing you. CB, you can't drive on a colorful crosswalk in your own town, and this could be fixed, but instead you'd rather fight against a wall 5,000 miles away. We've got the best.
Yeah, right.
The live chat in the King Pilt streams is the best. You guys are just banger after banger after banger. White nationalists secretly wanted Tim Scott for I told you so points. A white man on the ballot, you make me sick. That's really how it comes across.
For real. Yeah, it really does.
They wanted to be able to say, look, Trump, he's going to let us down, and there's nothing, we can't hope in anything, and you just have to burn it all down. And like they're angry, and they want an excuse to be angry. So you give them a reason why not being angry, and it's like, they just burn it up. No, I would just want to be angry. Okay. Right. All right. Well, you just keep being angry, and we'll keep winning.
Yeah. Get fucked, loser.
Snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. 2-Bit Podcast says, if Vance's wife converts to Christianity, that's a divine win. I'd rather 1 million brown Christians than even 1 white Hindu. And you notice in that article, and it was mentioned a few other places, that she was encouraging him to, when he was starting to think about getting baptized and joining the church, she was encouraging him to. She was pushing him to. She was saying, I like the effect this is having on you. And it's funny too, like she grew up in San Diego. She was born in an affluent suburban neighborhood in San Diego.
How devout is she as like a Hindu? That's one question. But another question is like, it kind of doesn't really matter because the kids follow the dad. That's statistically, that's how that works.
Yep.
So, it would be great if she came along and she converted as well. That would be, I hope that happens.
Yeah.
But
she said that she grew up in her parents were both very conservative and devoutly religious. And she talked about like I'm trying to remember where I read this. She talked about like the effect of growing up in a really wholesome, stable religious environment and how she wanted that for her children. And that's why for him, she was like, I don't really care. I want you to be devoutly religious and to lead our family as a devout religious man. And I don't really care. Yes, you're a white man, like, become a Christian. Be a devout Christian. What was that?
That was a picture that the little one just colored me.
Aw, that's sweet. My son, I just got a message from my wife. My son has been being a 3-year-old today. We'll say that. She said, Eastwood wants me to go to the mommy store where God makes mommies so he can get a new mommy because I'm not so lovey. He's also been having nightmares that Gaga is trying to take his food. And he's waking up crying in the middle of the night because Gaga is trying to take food away from him. All right. Douglas Charles says, I'm curious about how much influence the PayPal Mafia has in the DNC. Did they try and give up, or are they working both angles? I can't say I'd never vote Dem if someone like Tulsi Gabbard was it.
That's a good question.
I think, a lot of them were Democrats. Like being Democrat was fashionable within part of their culture, part of their milieu. It was like kind of like the only people who are Republicans are kind of like secretive weirdos.
Like Peter Thiel.
Yeah, right. So I'd imagine that as this whole thing has been coming together, that it's just like the premise of them coming together and really focusing their lobbying and political efforts has been the takeover of the GOP. And I think that's what we're going to get. The GOP is going to reflect gray America with all of all the positives and the negatives about that. The GOP is going to be the ascendant party that's going to reflect the gray tribe. So get to know them. Go listen to them, study them, evaluate their values, how they arrived at those values, the things that they value and why. Go get to know that, because you're going to have to be very familiar with it. And these are very normal people. They're just decent, ordinary people. They're pretty politically naive. They're just kind of a product of their environment. But they're also extremely intelligent. They're very productive. And they're growing a very strong sense of national pride and patriotism, which can be a vector for a lot more things. So if you're living in a democratic society like we do right now, for whatever extent of time that we continue this way, any political majority is going to be a coalition of people, which by definition means it's going to be people with divergent values. You don't build a coalition of people with the same values because it's not a coalition. You build a coalition of people with divergent values who agree to find some sort of common ground to attain certain things. And that means, by definition, some of those things that are being attained aren't going to be preferable to some members of that coalition. But it also means, by definition, that some of the things being obtained, so long as the coalition maintains together, are things that the members of those coalitions want. So it gives us an opportunity to get many of the things that we want, because we're already closely adjacent to these people, and they value many of the same things that we value. I saw someone who said that if the only thing that came out of Trump's next term in office is the absolute gutting of the administrative state and nothing else, if that's the only thing that we made any progress on, it would be more than enough. Which is kind of funny to me that you have all of these guys who have spent the last however many years theory selling and identified managerialism and all of the things associated with that, how it's a vector for, it's a plot of the Jews that's a vector for all their degeneracy and taking over in the Longhouse and all these different things. These all source back to these unelected bureaucracies, the legacy of FDR. Economically, socially, politically, everything all sources back to this managerial system. And these guys coming in have the managerial system in their sights. That's the thing they want to destroy. And you're concerned about like
the
things that are
vice
downstream
president's
from that?
wife?
Yeah, the vice president's wife, right? It shows how many of these theory cells it's just like a hobby to them. Like it's not, there's no actual like belief or I don't know, principle or virtue or integrity or anything like that downstream of it. It's just that they found a bailiwick that they could harp on for a while, and now that it's becoming popular, oh well, they don't want anything popular. They have to be, they have to be edgelords. So
right,
yeah. Do you think that the complete destruction of the bureaucratic administrative state might help on some of these other fronts? Perhaps, maybe, just a little bit. Whether you're a raw milk guy or a gun guy or a crypto guy or whatever your personal thing is, the destruction of the bureaucracy would go a long ways toward protecting or promoting those interests.
I think a lot of the theory cell guys, there was a time where they were kind of edgy, like 5 years ago or something like that. Like when NRX was still kind of a thing, like they actually were edgy, but since all of that's become mainstream now, maybe some of them just had too much of their identity wrapped up in the edgelord thing, and now they're kind of spurging out.
Mm-hmm.
And flailing.
Mm-hmm. Taylor says, I think
and getting even more ridiculous.
Uh-huh. He says, I think there's some skeleton in Governor Patrick Bateman's closet that kept them from coalescing around him. Governor
Newsom?
Oh, yeah. That must be referring to. Yeah. Oh, I can tell you there are absolutely skeletons in his closet. Apart from the fact that people just don't like being around him. Like from talking to people who've personally been around him, they're like, he's gross. Like he's not someone that you respect or you look up to or admire. He's I knew someone who went to college with him, and he's just a total like leering cokehead. Just exactly what you'd think. Just a party animal, cokehead, just nothing admirable or noble about him whatsoever. So he's slimy and greasy and just there's absolutely no way on God's green earth any one of the Rust Belt is ever going to vote for Gavin Newsom. So that makes his candidacy just DOA from the jump. Alrighty. Well, I appreciate you guys dropping in on us. Getting a little King Pilled episode out here. Like I said at the top, this will be posted on the King Pilled podcast feed. And I will be live tomorrow morning, about 10:30 or so Central Time, for another episode of the Astrolabe. I've got lots of good stuff for you. I've got some new video angles that have dropped of the Secret Service. I've got Matt Gaetz being a shithead to Kevin McCarthy. Donald Trump suggesting he would consider Jamie Dimon as Treasury Secretary. Very interesting. And an update on the Robbie Starbuck John Deere battle. So, got a whole bunch of stuff for you guys tomorrow. We'll be back at 10:30 Central Time. Appreciate all you guys. Please like the stream, share it, subscribe to the channel. Follow us on Twitter, @CooperBrooks, @RealKingPilled, and join the King Pilled Discord. KingPilled.com.